Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a really fascinating journey. It's into something that, on the surface, it seems purely medical, maybe just physical. We're talking about joint hypermobility. You might know it as being like double jointed. But the source material we're digging into today, it suggests this pretty common physical thing could actually be tied to much deeper shifts, maybe even metaphysical ones happening inside our bodies.
Yeah, it's quite a mix. We're working from this single but really comprehensive source document today. And it does something pretty unusual. It takes the hard data, like prevalence rates for hypermobility, and then pulls in the latest science on fascia, that amazing connective tissue web throughout the body that science is really starting to understand now. And then it weaves in these, well, quite intriguing metaphysical ideas about how the human body might be evolving or transforming. It's a unique blend for sure.
Okay, so our mission, like always in these deep dives, is to unpack all these layers that the source presents.
Right. We'll start grounded, looking at the physical reality, the numbers, what does the data actually say? Then we'll dive into the biology, the science bit, especially focusing on fascia, because the source makes it central.
Okay.
And then we'll explore that other angle, the perspective, linking these physical changes to potential energetic or, spiritual shifts.
So we're trying to understand what the source says about all of it and how it connects them.
Precisely. And what it might mean if you, listening, experience hypermobility yourself, whether it's just being a bit bendy or dealing with more complex stuff.
All right, so let's get ready to look at something familiar, maybe, but through some really different lenses. We might see this common trait in a surprising new light. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's unpack this first piece. The source starts right off by challenging an old idea, doesn't it? That hypermobility is, like, rare or just a harmless quirk.
Exactly. It argues it might be increasing or maybe just way more common than we thought.
So what do the numbers actually tell us? When we look at the data cited in this document, how common is hypermobility really? Well, the source jumps straight into the data. It focuses first on generalized joint hypermobility, GJH, especially in younger people. It points to a big 2020 meta-analysis that pulled together data from studies all over the world, and it found something pretty striking. About 34% of children and adolescents globally show signs of generalized joint hypermobility.
Wow, 34%. That's like 1 in 3 kids.
It's a huge number. And there's a gender difference, too, the analysis showed. It was around 32.5% in girls versus about 18.1% in boys.
Okay.
The source also mentions it's generally more common when kids are younger. I mean, toddlers are often incredibly flexible, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty normal early on.
Yeah, they seem made of rubber sometimes.
Exactly. And that natural laxity often decreases as they get older, as their muscles and bones mature through the teen years. But even in older kids, like 11 to 17-year-olds, studies cited still show rates of 10–15% in boys and significantly higher, maybe 20 to 40% in girls. Again, the higher numbers tend to be in the younger part of that range.
So it often fades, but not always.
That's the critical point the source really hammers home. For a good number of these kids, it doesn't just go away, it sticks around into adulthood. And for many of them, it's not just being flexible, it comes with symptoms like pain, fatigue, joints dislocating or partially dislocating, other systemic issues.
Right, so it's not just benign then.
Not always. These symptomatic conditions now fall under this umbrella term, hypermobility spectrum disorders, or HSD. There's also a more specific, often more severe form called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, HEDS, that usually involves more systemic connective tissue fragility, often thought to have a genetic basis, though finding the specific gene marker for most people with HEDS has been tricky.
Okay.
And that female predominance we saw in kids, it continues into adulthood. Hypermobility and related conditions are roughly 3 times more common in women. Genetics, hormones like estrogen influencing collagen, they all likely play a role.
And it varies across populations, too.
Yes, the source notes that as well. Ethnic variations are significant. Studies suggest populations of Asian and African descent tend to have higher rates of GJH compared to Caucasian populations. So it suggests genetics, maybe lifestyle factors too, influence who's more likely to be hypermobile. So right off the bat, the data says a lot of young people are really flexible.
1 in 3 youth globally, that number is just sticking with me. Which leads right into that next crucial point the source makes. Is this actually an increase in the trait itself, or are we just, finally noticing it more, getting better at diagnosing it?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the source makes a really strong case that, yes, a huge part of this is increased awareness and better diagnosis. Historically, conditions like Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, they were seen as incredibly rare, like
Yeah.
medical zebras,
Yeah.
things doctors might read about but never actually see.
Right. The old figure was like 1 in 5,000.
Something like that for all types of EDS combined. Very rare. But the source brings in newer research showing a massive shift. It points to recent population studies, like a 2019 Welsh study. It found the diagnosed prevalence of all EDS types was closer to 1 in 3,100, already quite a jump in identified cases.
Okay, so more diagnoses happening.
But then, if you broaden the net to include the whole hypermobility spectrum disorder category, along with HEDS, recognizing that lots of people have significant symptoms from hypermobility, but maybe didn't meet the strict old criteria for HEDS, well, population studies now suggest that somewhere between 1 in 500 to maybe 1 in 800 people could have either HSD or HEDS.
Wow, 1 in 500. That's completely different.
It's an order of magnitude more common than previously thought. It's not a small adjustment. It's a fundamental rethink of how widespread these conditions are. The Ehlers-Danlos Society itself now says these disorders are likely common, but still, unfortunately, underdiagnosed in many places.
So it's not necessarily more people being hypermobile, but more people getting the right diagnosis.
That seems to be a massive factor. The source gives a practical example. Think about a typical family doctor with, say, 5,000 patients. Realistically, they should probably expect to see maybe 5 to 10 patients with significant hypermobility issues or HSD if they're trained to look for it. That's worlds away from thinking it's a 1 in 5,000 rarity.
So a big piece of this feeling like an increase is just doctors, therapists finally seeing what was maybe always there. They're recognizing the signs better.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a key driver the source highlights for the rise in diagnosed cases. You see growing recognition among specialists, like pediatric rheumatologists. They're now identifying hypermobility more often as the underlying issue in kids' joint pain that used to just get dismissed.
Makes sense.
And there are anecdotes in the source, too, like a massage therapist who noticed, consistently, maybe 2 out of 5 clients showed clear signs. And crucially, she observed these people often had chronic pain since adolescence and had been labeled hopeless cases in older therapy books because their symptoms didn't fit neatly anywhere else.
So they're falling through the cracks.
Completely. And this shift reflects that broader trend. Conditions like HEDS are moving from being seen as these super rare oddities, the zebras, to being understood as relatively common chronic health issues that clinicians really need to consider.
And the online groups?
The explosion of online support groups for HSD and HEDS. It reflects this growing awareness, yes, but probably also a real rise in people finally getting answers after potentially years of unexplained pain and weird symptoms.
So better criteria, more awareness.
Exactly. While it's hard to track if the underlying trait is genuinely increasing over long periods, that's complex, research experts strongly suspect the surge in identified cases comes down to 2 things. Better diagnostic criteria, especially that 2017 reclassification of HEDS and the introduction of HSD, and just fundamentally more awareness and education among health professionals. The takeaway from the source is clear. Hypermobility, especially in young people, is very common. And the big change is that the medical system is finally starting to take the associated symptoms seriously, moving past that old benign label that led to so much dismissal.
Okay, beyond the general numbers and this rising awareness, the source also points out that hypermobility seems to pop up more often in specific groups. Who are these notable clusters it mentions?
Well, the obvious one, the one people often think of, is athletes and performers in fields needing extreme flexibility. Dancers, gymnasts, figure skaters, contortionists.
Right.
And while their training definitely pushes flexibility, there's often an underlying genetic predisposition there. They can reach and maintain those extreme ranges partly because their connective tissue is built differently from the start. So training, yes, but often predisposition too.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Then there's the really intriguing, more recent finding the source highlights, the link between hypermobility and neurodivergent conditions. It specifically mentions a pretty compelling 2023 study on kids with autism spectrum disorder, ASD.
Oh, interesting. What did it find?
It found over 60% of preschool kids with ASD, and get this, 73% of older kids with ASD met the criteria for joint hypermobility.
73%. Compared to the general youth rate of around 34%, that's huge.
It's dramatically higher. The source notes, of course, that correlation doesn't equal causation, right? We don't have a confirmed direct link yet.
Yeah.
But clinicians and researchers are actively hypothesizing there might be some shared developmental factor, maybe something genetic, that influences both how connective tissue forms and how the brain develops, perhaps involving certain proteins or pathways important to both systems.
Wow.
And beyond ASD, hypermobility is also noted frequently in people with ADHD, and with dysautonomia, those are disorders of the autonomic nervous system, controlling things like heart rate, blood pressure, digestion,
Ah, okay.
and conditions like mast cell activation syndrome, MCLAS. This whole area, the connection between connective tissue variations, neurodevelopment, autonomic function, immune responses like MCS, it's a super active and really important area of research the source emphasizes.
So these patterns, these clusters, they really underscore that it's not random.
Exactly. It clusters among young females, certain ethnic groups, and notably among neurodiverse individuals and those with these complex multisystem conditions. It's strong evidence that both genetics and maybe environmental factors are involved, painting a picture of something much more systemic than just, loose joints.
Yeah, definitely more complex than just being double jointed. It points to these potentially deeper connections. So let's pull this part together. Looking at all this, the high prevalence, the better awareness, these clusters, what's the key message here for you, the listener, if you're hypermobile or maybe know someone who is?
I think the core takeaway from the source here is hypermobility is way more common than we used to think. You're absolutely not alone if this is part of your experience. And the fact that it's finally being taken more seriously by doctors and therapists with better diagnostic tools emerging, that means if you have joint issues, chronic pain, or other symptoms alongside flexibility, there's growing recognition these things are often connected. Resources and knowledgeable practitioners are catching up.
That's hopeful.
It is. And the clustering, especially with neurodivergent or autonomic conditions, highlights that hypermobility might be tied into broader systemic or developmental factors, which really points towards needing a holistic approach to understand and manage it. It's moving out of the shadows of being a rare oddity and into the light as an important part of many people's health stories.
Okay, that really sets the stage. Now let's get into the why. Why does hypermobility happen, and how does it affect the body so fundamentally?
The source is super clear. We have to talk about fascia.
Yeah.
And like I said, I used to think of it as just that cling wrap stuff, packing material.
Yeah.
But the source paints a totally different picture. Dynamic, living, important.
And that shift in understanding fascia, it's probably one of the biggest developments in anatomy and physiology research in recent decades. It's huge. Fascia is now understood as this continuous 3D web of collagen-based connective tissue. It literally surrounds and weaves through everything in your body, muscles, bones, nerves, organs, blood vessels. It's all connected, one system.
From head to toe, literally. And that old idea of inert packing material, totally gone. Science now shows fascia is a living dynamic system. It's crucial for giving us structural stability, for coordinating efficient movement, for transmitting forces across the body, and even for communication within the body. It's loaded with sensory receptors. This understanding underpins new models like biotensegrity.
Biotensegrity, right? That's not the old stack of bones idea.
Exactly. Forget the body as just bones stacked up bearing weight. Think of it more like a tensegrity structure. The bones are like compression struts, but they're kind of floating within this continuous tension network provided by the fascia, tendons, ligaments.
Okay, like a tent, maybe. Poles and fabric tension.
That's a decent analogy. In a healthy biotensegrity system, when you put force on it, like when you move laving, the load isn't just dumped onto one joint. It gets distributed efficiently throughout that whole elastic fascial web. The source uses the example of moving your arm. The force isn't just at the shoulder. It's transmitted and buffered through fascia, connecting muscles all the way down your arm into your torso. That balanced elastic tension in the fascia is key for this integrated stability and allowing smooth, coordinated movement.
Okay, so if the body relies on this fascial web for its structure and function, then in hypermobility, is that web just different, built differently?
Yes, that's exactly the core idea from the biomedical angle in the source. It quotes a manual therapist who specializes in this area, and she puts it simply, the connective tissue in hypermobile people is often too soft. And that softness relates directly to collagen. Collagen is the main protein fiber in fascia, giving it its tensile strength, its ability to resist stretching, like a rope. The source explains that many hypermobile individuals have some genetic variation or other factor affecting their collagen. This results in collagen fibers that are maybe looser, stretchier, or don't link together in the typical way. Quoting that therapist again, she says the connective tissue might have too little collagen, or the collagen it does have doesn't provide enough stiffness. The result is this looser, weaker fascial scaffold throughout the whole body.
And that affects more than just the joints.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The consequences are systemic. Without that normal stiffness and passive support from the fascia, joints obviously lack inherent stability. They move too much, get sprained easily, dislocate. But the source also points out it affects internal organs too. The fascial slings and ligaments holding organs in place can also be too lax. So people with hypermobility might be more prone to things like organ prolapse, acid reflux, digestive motility issues, because that internal structural support system isn't as firm.
Okay, now here's where it gets really counterintuitive and honestly confusing based on what people say. The source mentions this huge paradox. People with hypermobility whose tissues are too soft often say they feel incredibly stiff and tense. How does that even work? It sounds completely backward.
It absolutely sounds backward, but it makes perfect sense once you understand the body's compensation strategies, which the source explains really well. Think about it. If your basic fascial foundation, those built-in guy wires of your structure, are too slack, what happens? Your muscles have to step in and work overtime. They reflexively tighten up. They act like extra bracing, extra guy wires, trying desperately to stop joints from moving too much and to make up for that missing passive fascial support.
Ah, so the muscles are trying to do the fascia's job.
Exactly. It's a heroic effort by the muscular system to create stability where the connective tissue isn't providing enough.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly tiring and energy draining, and it leads directly to that feeling of constant stiffness and tension.
That therapist quote comes back, "I'm the tightest person in my class. I can barely put on my socks."
That quote perfectly captures it. The stiffness isn't because their muscles are inherently tight, it's because of this chronic reflexive muscle tension. They develop these deep, palpable knots as muscles are constantly firing, trying to guard and brace those unstable joints. The source even describes it vividly. It's almost like a second skeleton made of muscle spasm forms around vulnerable areas like the neck, the hips, the low back. Just a desperate attempt to prevent injury from the underlying laxity.
But that compensation causes its own problems, right?
Big time. That constant high muscle tone. It causes widespread pain itself. It also reduces blood flow to the tissues, which isn't great. And it actually compresses the joints, adding to the discomfort and potentially wearing them down faster. Over the long term, joints subjected to this repeated micro-instability from the laxity, constantly being yanked on by overworking muscles. They can get inflamed and even develop premature osteoarthritis.
So it's a vicious cycle.
Totally. It creates that classic, confusing clinical picture many people with HSD live with.
Yeah.
This frustrating mix of being overly flexible in some ways, but also having debilitating pain, stiffness, joints that crack or slip, and constantly dealing with soft tissue injuries because the whole system isn't properly supported by its connective tissue framework.
Wow. Okay. That explanation of the compensation, the second skeleton,
Mm.
that really clarifies the stiffness paradox. It's the whole system trying to cope. Now, the source also says fascia isn't static, it adapts. How does that adaptability factor in?
Right, fascia is remarkably adaptable, much more so than muscle or nerve tissue, actually. Research by pioneers like Robert Schleip shows connective tissue can remodel itself relatively quickly, like within months, based on the demands placed on it.
Months.
Yeah. So if you're sedentary, your fascia can get kind of dry and less pliable. If you do repetitive movements or specific stretches, fascia can respond by getting longer or sometimes thicker and stronger in certain areas. Now, crucially for hypermobility, the source points out that not only does the fascia start out different than too soft collagen, but it also seems to react and adapt differently to stress and injury compared to typical fascia.
How so?
It mentions some cutting-edge research using ultrasound elastography. That's a technique to measure tissue stiffness. Work by Dr. Antonio Stecco and his group. They found measurable differences in fascial properties in people with HEDS. For example, the deep fascia in the neck, around that big SCM muscle. It was actually thicker in HEDS patients compared to controls.
Thicker. But I thought it was softer.
That's the complexity. It might be trying to compensate by thickening, but maybe not in an organized, functional way. Another really interesting finding they cite. In non-hypermobile people with chronic pain, fascia tends to soften over time. But in HEDS patients with chronic pain, that softening response was much less noticeable or blunted. One idea is that maybe HEDS fascia is already kind of softer or more fluid at baseline due to the collagen issues, so it doesn't change texture as much with chronic pain.
Okay, that's complicated.
It is, and there's more. There's evidence of what's called fascial gliding dysfunction. Using advanced imaging, researchers see that the different layers of fascia in people with HEDS, HSD often don't slide smoothly over each other when they move.
Like they're sticky.
Exactly. Instead of gliding easily, the tissue can be thickened and sticky. That's called fascial densification. And that lack of smooth sliding. It means every movement can cause tugging and strain instead of distributing force smoothly. This directly contributes to joint instability, restricted movement patterns, and pain. If the fascia can't glide and redistribute forces properly, the joints take the hit.
So these findings really back up the idea that it's not just loose ligaments.
Absolutely. The source uses this research to reinforce that hypermobility is a systemic connective tissue condition. It's about the quality and behavior of the entire fascial matrix, its thickness, its hydration, its cellular activity, how its layers interact being altered throughout the body.
Is there cellular evidence too?
Yes, the source mentions things like biopsy studies and gene expression research. For example, work by Columbia and others found that fibroblasts, the main cells that build and maintain connective tissue, can behave abnormally in HEDS. They might shift into a state more like myofibroblasts, which are cells usually involved in wound healing and fibrosis, laying down extra collagen.
But isn't more collagen good?
Not necessarily if it's disorganized. So you get this weird situation. Part of the tissue is too lax because of the underlying collagen type, but other parts might be trying to compensate by laying down extra but maybe disorganized collagen. This attempt to strengthen can actually cause localized stiffness, adhesions, and thick restricted areas in the wrong places. It perfectly explains that mix of having too much movement in some areas and painful stiffness or restriction in others.
Okay, so genetics set the stage, but it sounds like environment, lifestyle, how we use our bodies, that all really shapes how this fascial system actually behaves in hypermobility.
Definitely. The state of your fascia isn't just predetermined by genes. It's hugely influenced by, well, everything. Yeah. What you eat, how you handle stress, how you move or don't move. Remember, fascia is basically collagen fibers in this ground substance made of water, sugars, proteins.
Right, so diet matters.
Big time. For building healthy collagen, the body needs key nutrients. The source quotes that fascia therapist emphasizing vitamin C and organic sulfur, like MSM. She calls them critical. Think about scurvy, right? Severe vitamin C deficiency leads to a total collagen breakdown systemically. It's an extreme example, but it shows how vital these nutrients are for connective tissue integrity.
And bad stuff in the diet.
Can hurt it too. The source mentions high sugar intake and chronic stress make fascia less elastic. Partly through glycation, sugar molecules basically gumming up the collagen fibers, making them stiff and brittle. This happens in aging and diabetes, but it means a poor diet could actually worsen localized stiffness and dysfunction in someone already hypermobile.
What about hydration?
Crucial. Fascia is like 70% water, but it's special structured water, almost like a liquid crystal within the matrix. Regular varied movement acts like squeezing a sponge. It helps flush out waste and rehydrate the fascia, keeping it sliding nicely.
Ah, so movement helps hydrate it.
Yes. Inactivity lets it get dry and sticky, leading to adhesions. That's exactly why gentle, frequent movement is often key for managing hypermobility. It nourishes the tissues that lack passive support. Sitting still for hours is often the enemy.
Any other environmental factors mentioned?
There's some speculation, noted in the source, about environmental chemicals like endocrine disruptors. Could they affect collagen or tissue laxity? Maybe mimicking hormones like relaxin? The research is early days, but it's a question mark.
Yeah, stress.
Definitely. Fascia is packed with sensory nerves. Chronic stress activates that fight or flight system, which ramps up overall muscle tone and fascial tension. This just pours fuel on the fire of that muscular guarding in hypermobile folks, making pain and stiffness worse. So stress management, rest, emotional well-being, they're not just nice-to-haves, they're fundamental for caring for the fascial system, especially when it's already different.
Okay, let's loop back to biotensegrity. How does all this detailed fascia knowledge fit into that model for hypermobility?
Right, so in the ideal biotensegrity model, you've got this perfect balance. Tension from fascia and muscles, compression from bones, everything shares the load nicely. Hypermobility throws that balance off. The main tension elements of the fascia, the ligaments are too slack or inconsistent or not gliding right. So, like that tendon analogy again, if the guy lines are loose or tangled, the whole structure gets wobbly. It can't handle forces efficiently.
My body tries to fix it.
Exactly. Those compensations, the muscle bracing, the fascial thickening, are the body's attempts, often clumsy, to restore some kind of tensegrity, some stability, to that compromised structure.
And this understanding leads to specific therapies.
Yes, it's the foundation for a lot of modern effective approaches. Things like Tom Meyer's Anatomy Trains model, they look at these long, continuous lines of fascia, myofascial meridians running through the body. So instead of just treating, say, a stiff neck in isolation, they see it as part of a pattern along a whole fascial line, maybe connected to issues down in the feet or pelvis. From this view, a hypermobile ankle isn't just a local problem. It's part of a bigger picture of laxity and compensation throughout the system.
So therapies work on the whole line.
Often, yes. Techniques like targeted fascial stretching, structural integration, manual therapy to improve that glide between layers, and also proprioceptive training.
Proprioception, that's body awareness.
Yeah, your sense of where your body parts are in space, it's often impaired in hypermobility, but specific exercises can improve it a lot. Better proprioception means better muscle coordination, which helps protect the joints. There's even research showing that certain kinds of strength training can actually increase the stiffness of tendons and fascia in hypermobile people, which can be really beneficial if they're too lax to begin with.
So strengthening can help tighten things up a bit.
In a functional way, yes. As movement therapist Jeannie DeBon, quoted in the source, sums it up based on this science, fascia is a dynamic, living tissue that plays a central role in how the body moves, senses, and adapts. So, by actively caring for your fascia through the right kind of movement, good nutrition, managing stress, staying hydrated, people with hypermobility can often significantly improve their pain and stability. Fascia is really that bridge between our genes and our environment, constantly adjusting based on the input it receives.
Okay, so bringing this back to you, the listener, if you're dealing with hypermobility, understanding this fascia science really helps explain why your body might feel the way it does, right?
Absolutely.
It moves beyond just weak joints or being bendy to seeing it as this systemic difference in your connective tissue, especially this amazing fascial web. And crucially, it gives you practical ways to find support, focusing on optimizing the health of that whole system. Now, this is where the source takes a really big turn. A turn you might not expect after talking prevalence data and fascia mechanics. It brings in a, well, deeply metaphysical perspective. What is this idea it presents about us maybe moving from a carbon-based to a crystalline-based body?
Yeah, this section definitely shifts gears into different territory. It draws on ideas from various spiritual and metaphysical traditions. You find them in New Age thought, ascension guides, channeled materials attributed to non-physical sources like Pleiadian or Arcturian consciousnesses. These traditions propose that humanity and Earth itself are going through this profound evolutionary shift. They talk about moving to higher dimensions of consciousness, higher frequencies of energy, and part of that, they suggest, involves the physical body transforming from what they call carbon-based to crystalline-based.
Crystalline, like actual crystals.
Well, it's often used metaphorically first, moving from being dense, heavy, maybe a bit inert, like carbon, to being lighter, more energetic, resonant, highly structured like crystals are, often based on silicon, which has that lattice structure. The idea is the body becomes less dense, more able to hold and conduct light or higher energy frequencies.
Okay, so a metaphor for becoming more energetic.
It starts there, but some interpretations in these fields, as the source notes, describe it more literally, though definitely outside conventional science. It mentions specific spiritual counselors, Drs. Loren and Diane Mickelson. They apparently describe this change happening at the cellular level, driven by shifts in Earth's energy environment.
How do they describe it?
According to their view in the source, it involves things like extra electron layers forming around cells, boosting their energy potential. Over time, this supposedly makes cells crystalline, able to vibrate or spin faster, maybe becoming less dense, less bound by gravity. This is seen as building the light body.
The light body.
Right. They emphasize it's a slow, gradual process, maybe over lifetimes, tied into Earth's own ascension timeline. It's this idea that our physical matter is being fundamentally rewired to handle more spiritual light and energy.
So just to be clear, in these specific traditions, this isn't just a metaphor. Some see it as a real, albeit subtle, physical change happening.
Yes, that's the perspective put forward in these sources cited. They mention contemporary authors in the starseed community and various channeled messages talking explicitly about DNA activation, changes at the subatomic or cellular level. That starseed author quoted puts it bluntly, "Our bodies are transforming to silica-based instead of carbon, so we're naturally going to feel some things."
Feel things, like symptoms.
Exactly. This author and others suggest this process hits the nervous system particularly hard, being the body's main electrical network. The adjustments needed can cause a whole range of unusual physical sensations, often called ascension symptoms in these circles.
What kind of symptom?
The source lists common ones from this literature: dizziness or vertigo, ringing in the ears and tinnitus, widespread joint aches, Deep fatigue that comes and goes, sudden shifts in flexibility or stiffness. Sound familiar from our earlier discussion?
Yeah, some overlap with hypermobility issues, definitely.
Right. The source also mentions specific energy teachings, like from the Mahatma energy, suggesting you can intentionally call in high-frequency light to help speed up this conversion. And channelings from Arcturian or Syrian sources are cited as describing physical upgrades, sometimes specifically mentioning connective tissues and skin becoming more translucent or better light conductors. The theme is always about dormant potentials in our cells and DNA getting lit up by these incoming energies.
And this is where the science and metaphysics in the source seem to find that surprising connection point. It points right back to fascia, just like the science did.
Precisely. This is where the source tries to build its bridge. It points out that even scientifically, collagen is a crystalline triple helix molecule and has that piezoelectric property. It generates electricity when stressed. So the source argues, if you had to pick a body part that already has crystalline properties and might conduct energy or information in line with these metaphysical ideas, collagen and the whole fascial network are prime candidates.
But the metaphysical view goes further.
Oh, way further. In that view, fascia isn't just mechanical. It's seen as a primary storage and conductor for light, for life force energy prana, chi. The source cites the Ascension glossary from Lisa Renee. It explicitly calls the connective tissue network an embedded liquid crystalline matrix that's key for integrating multiple dimensions of reality.
A liquid crystalline matrix.
Yeah. Quoting the glossary, this fascia crystalline network supposedly saturates our cells with multidimensional light and sound, acting as the most important energetic communication system in our physical body. So this perspective lifts fascia way beyond just biology. It becomes this crucial interface between our physical selves and our energetic or spiritual aspects. As bodies supposedly shift frequency, the fascia, acting as this liquid crystal matrix, is thought to conduct these higher energies, this light, throughout the whole body, infusing cells, tissues, even subtle energy channels.
Okay, if we follow this crystalline body idea from the sources,
Right.
what would that actually look or feel like physically, according to these texts?
Well, based on descriptions of crystals orderly, high-energy structures, the source speculates a crystal body or light body might be highly sensitive, like a finely tuned network may be able to sense subtle energies, vibrational shifts, or have heightened intuition felt through the body.
Like body wisdom.
Kind of. And you know how even conventional body workers find fascia seems to hold old emotions or trauma, and releasing it can trigger emotional releases. That fits conceptually with fascia as an information carrier, maybe on energetic levels. In a fully activated light body, fascia is theorized to be more resilient, fluid, less prone to energetic blocks. But, and this is key in the source during the transition, things can get unstable. If fascia is actively shifting towards being more energetic, maybe its old mechanical solidity fluctuates.
And that's where the hypermobility link comes in.
That's the speculation the source puts forward. Could hypermobility be a physical sign of this transition? The idea being maybe the fascia is literally less set in the old dense collagen way, hence the loose joints, while it's recalibrating or preparing for this new role as a more crystalline, energy-conducting structure.
It's a radical idea.
It is. The source mentions how often people in online spiritual or starseed groups report having high sensitivity and unexplained joint issues, chronic pain, fatigue, connective tissue weirdness. They often ask if there's a spiritual reason. And the esoteric answer, suggested in these sources, is potentially yes. Their bodies might be wired differently or changing to handle higher frequencies. The physical challenges, pain, fatigue, instability, are seen in this view as the temporary adjustment phase until they strengthen and fully integrate the new structure.
So again, this isn't saying ignore real medical problems. It's offering a different frame for why they might be happening in certain people.
Exactly. And it's crucial. The source emphasizes this through the starseed author's words.
Yeah.
These ascension teachings all stress personal responsibility and diligent self-care during the transition. It's not passive. It's explicitly stated that this shift often involves discomfort and needs active participation. Things like getting enough rest, clean nutrition, pure water, emotional clearing, they're seen as essential to help the body adjust with more ease. That author says the body primarily needs love and support during these times, cautioning against only seeing symptoms as illness without considering the bigger picture.
But still address the health issues medically.
Absolutely. The source stresses bridging the spiritual view with practical wisdom and necessary medical care. Don't ignore a diagnosed condition. The metaphysical view basically suggests the fascia, nervous system, maybe DNA are getting upgrades, and sometimes these upgrades show up as unusual physical symptoms like changes in flexibility, stability, energy, and sensitivity.
Okay, so for you, the listener, this part of the source presents an alternative lens. If the science resonates, great. If these metaphysical ideas also resonate, or if you're looking for a broader context for your experiences, this perspective suggests there might be more going on than just the purely physical.
A bigger story, perhaps.
Right. Which brings us to the final part, where the source really tries to connect these two worlds, the science of hypermobility and fascia, and the metaphysics of the crystalline body. How does it attempt to build that bridge?
It tries to synthesize them by proposing that hypermobility can be seen as both a medical reality and a potential sign of this energetic transformation. It brings in frameworks possibly like those from Aima Being, described as coaching on the spiritualization of matter. From this viewpoint, the rise in hypermobility, especially in young people and those identified as sensitives or starseeds, isn't just a statistic. It could be a physical sign that this crystalline light body template is starting to come online more widely.
So, hypermobility as a sign of embodiment.
In this specific view, yes. Aima Being's perspective, as interpreted by the source, might suggest a hypermobile person has a structure that's inherently less carbon-dense, more fluid, making it easier for them to embody higher frequencies. The suggested mechanism. Energetically, the fascia in such a person is becoming more infused with light or prana. As a result, maybe it doesn't solidify in the old dense way, fewer rigid collagen cross-links, more pliability, hence the physical looseness. It aligns with the idea that raising your light quotient makes the body more malleable, less rigid, more fire and air elements, less dense earth, esoterically speaking. Aima Being might frame it like the cocoon stage, vulnerable, flexible, necessary for the transformation.
So, the symptoms in this view aren't just problems, they're messages.
Exactly. The instability, the pain, the autonomic issues, they're seen not just as random flaws, but as communications from this body cocoon, asking for conscious help in the metamorphosis. And fascia is central. Scientifically, we see it can get thick and sticky in DHEDS, causing problems. Metaphysically, this could be seen as energetic blocks, resistance, or incomplete upgrades in that fascial network.
So, what's the game plan then from this integrated view?
The source suggests it involves actively engaging in healing both physical and energetic. The idea is, by doing this, you help your fascia reorganize at a higher level, to crystallize properly and functionally, not pathologically, with disorganized thickening and pain. Practices that bridge both worlds are highlighted: myofascial release, craniosacral therapy, acupuncture. The source notes that connection between fascia and acupuncture meridians maybe fascia is the physical pathway for qi. So working fascia physically affects energy, and working with energy affects fascia.
This definitely offers a more hopeful, maybe empowering frame for people struggling with hypermobility.
It really does, especially for those who resonate with being sensitive or on a spiritual path. It reframes challenges as potentially having a higher purpose. They're wired differently for a reason, and their bodies, with care, could become these finely tuned instruments. The source even brings up analogies to Lemurian or Atlantean light bodies, ancient, highly capable forms.
So, the game plan is honor both sides.
Precisely. Use medical knowledge and therapy to stabilize and strengthen physically targeted exercise, good nutrition, vitamin C, MSM, magnesium as the therapist suggested, address diagnosed issues, and also use metaphysical tools to nurture the energetic side: meditation, energy healing, setting positive intentions, consciously sending love and support to your cells and fascia, as suggested. This view emphasizes consciousness playing a key role in easing the transition.
So, hypermobility viewed very differently here.
Very differently. Not a defect, but a marker of evolution. A loosening of the old structure, an early adaptation to new frequencies, but one needing careful handling.
Like the high-performance car analogy.
Exactly. Needs premium fuel, careful maintenance. The hypermobile crystalline body, in this view, needs high-quality inputs, clean diet, pure water, emotional balance, the right kind of movement, and fine-tuning. And starseeds, the source suggests, often intuitively know this, gravitating towards holistic health, needing more rest, being sensitive to chemicals, all consistent with the body in metamorphosis.
And the increasing numbers in the general population, what does that suggest in this integrated view?
The source suggests this could mean humanity as a whole is undergoing this subtle shift. What was rare, this combination of flexibility and systemic features, is becoming more common. While there are secular explanations, environment, epigenetics, The metaphysical lens sees it possibly as a purposeful influx of souls with different templates, or a collective shift towards a new Earth body lighter, more energetically capable.
Wow.
Maybe we're the bridge generation, physically navigating between the old dense body and a new blueprint.
Is there anything actually measurable scientifically that even hints at this crystalline idea?
The source briefly touches on science that sounds resonant. Structured water in fascia behaving like a liquid crystal. Piezoelectric currents in collagen. Measurable energy generation. Biophoton research showing weak light emissions are more coherent in healthy tissue.
Biophotons. Light in the body.
Ultra-weak light, yeah. The source speculates. Maybe as we evolve, connective tissue will show greater biophoton coherence, becoming more crystalline in function. This could enhance healing, communication, faster self-repair, intuitive info transfer via this physical energetic network. It connects directly to that light body concept, a body partly operating on light, with photon-based communication. And fascia, quoting the source, would be the transport messenger of intelligent information, carrying this light, bridging physical and energetic dimensions.
Okay, so wrapping this part up for you, the listener. This integrated view doesn't ignore the medical reality of hypermobility, but it layers a potential spiritual or evolutionary meaning on top. It reframes the challenge as possibly part of a bigger transformation, suggesting a holistic approach to manage it.
It definitely offers a different perspective.
Wow, what a journey this deep dive has been, seriously. From global prevalence stats and deep fascia science, all the way to crystalline bodies and light networks within us, we've really covered the ground laid out in these sources.
We really have. We've seen how hypermobility is far more common, far more complex than once believed, and how fascia science gives us powerful explanations for symptoms and points to real physical ways to find support.
And then we explored that completely different yet complementary perspective from the metaphysical sources, suggesting this physical shift towards flexibility and sensitivity might be linked to something bigger, a transformation towards a less dense, more energetic state, with fascia as that potential key interface.
Yeah, the sources present hypermobility as this intricate phenomenon. It's a biomedical reality needing care, definitely, but also maybe a sign of the body's incredible adaptability and perhaps, just perhaps, an indicator of evolving human consciousness and structure.
It absolutely makes you think differently about your own body, doesn't it? Any physical quirks or sensitivities you might experience really changes the frame.
It does put a different spin on things.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to take away and chew on, straight from the perspective offered in our source material. Could the very real physical inconveniences, the struggles some people face today, those loose joints, the weird pains, the fatigue, those heightened sensitivities, could they actually be interpreted as the labor pains of an evolutionary upgrade happening within the human biomechanical and energetic system?